All right, so this session is giving you an update on what's coming next with OpenSocial. So we want to talk a little bit about not where the spec is. There have been other sessions on that. People who have been working with it have a sense of that, but where we're going. Let me ask a few just calibration questions, understand who's where. Who feels like they're reasonably familiar with the current state of the OpenSocial API? They sort of, okay. Who here has built an OpenSocial application? All right, that's so I'd think that I'd say that the people who said reasonably familiar were around a third to a half, and the have built was around 20%. Who here feels like they have a pretty good idea of what's coming in 0.8 and beyond? Okay, and a couple of hands. So good. People actually are here to learn, and not to catch us out on mistakes. But if you do, please help. All right. So what we're going to go through today, a little bit on process, because in the process is actually important to understand because it's a community process and because we want people to understand what exactly did we go through to define 0.8, we meaning the community. That's the template that we intend to follow for defining 0.9 and beyond. So if you hear anything or as you get more involved, see things where you say, wouldn't it be nice if the spec did this, or I'd like it to do that, or here's an extension I think would be wonderful. This is how you all can help that happen, not in 0.8, which is baked, but beyond that. And then we're going to do drill downs, and I'm going to get out of the way and let some of the people sitting here in the front row come on up and give you a lot more detailed information about these different areas, talk about them when we get there. We're trying to leave a good chunk of time for Q&A so that people, because we're just going to be skimming the surface of a lot of the updates, and I'm sure there are going to be specific questions, but if we covered everything in depth, we wouldn't have time, so we're doing it that way. And then I'll say it at the beginning and close with this at the end. Please get involved. If you're interested, if there's something you'd like to see, something you'd like to accelerate, we've got some pointers to here's how you can play moving forward. So what's the process? How did we get here? And it was this turned out to be one of the areas where I personally learned the most so far in OpenSocial is how do you actually balance at one extreme, sort of the benefits of dictatorship in trying to govern and control something moving forward, and at the other extreme, the benefits of anarchy in trying to control and move something forward. And I'm happy with where the balance is right now. I think it's going to keep evolving. Let me walk you through how that settled down. And these are the steps. I'll talk to you about each of them. So first, baseline that for this little piece of the story is 0.7. There was an OpenSocial 0.5 and 0.6. We had a much more ad hoc and much smaller community involved in that. It was a messier process. It was the only thing we learned from that is let's not do it that way again. So 0.7, it got us to a pretty good baseline. All of you who have built OpenSocial apps, you saw the numbers yesterday on the success of OpenSocial, the uptake by containers and apps. Good baseline, but the process for getting to that baseline didn't scale to let as much community involvement happen as we wanted. So what we did is, let me look at the date on this. This was April 10th. There's an open discussion group, an email discussion group with archiving. There's links to it in the presentation. To discuss the spec and the future of the spec and the directions. And beginning of April, we put out this proposal. I think a bunch of people got together at one of the Apache cons in Europe, at a London hackathon. So a bunch of different people from the community that was working with 0.7 got together and said, here's a proposal for how we work. And the proposal in a nutshell was, let's do it all. First of all conversations are in public on the mailing list, so everyone can participate. And there were participation from multiple continents and time zones, so that was important. Second, anyone can throw ideas in, can throw proposals in, with big bonus points for proposals that are sort of actionable, that are phrased as, here's a proposed diff to the spec. We suggest adding this paragraph, or we suggest updating the values of this enum, or something like that. But just toss out points, discussion points like that, suggestions, with a date for all proposals in, then lots of discussion on the proposals and people saying, and then a decision-making process. It was a decision-making process to try to find a formal definition of informal consensus. And the working definition was, if you have 5 people who say, yes, I think this is a good idea, 5 plus 1s, and nobody who says, no, I think this is a bad idea, no minus 1s, that counts as consensus. And the sort of informal guidelines were don't vote unless you know enough to vote. Don't say something unless you've actually thought about it, thought about this proposal, understand what is and isn't good about it, and are able to say, yeah, I actually support this strongly, or no, I have a reason not to. That would lead to some of those, there were a few proposals that resolved very quickly. There were others that went back and forth. In the process of doing that, that led to, I think the total count was at about 90, 91, 92 different line items in the spreadsheet, roughly. So there were that ended up generating a little under 100 line items. Cassie Dahl, who's on her way back from Europe right now, actually, but acted as the informal coordinator of this whole process, and she maintained a spreadsheet with pointers back to the discussion group. This is just the top of that spreadsheet. There's about 90 rows in here summarizing the state of the discussion. And I'd say around half of those 90 ended up being adopted by the community. People said, yeah, good idea, let's include it. I'd say around half of the others were probably a good idea, but we didn't converge in time, so let's keep this on the pending list for the next time around for 0.9. And then the other quarter were, no, this really isn't a good idea, or this is obsoleted by something else. That's roughly how it worked out. Around a month after that first email I showed you, so this was beginning of May, Dan, who is sitting here in the front row, Dan Peterson, sent out this email that said, we think we're done. We think we have finished, reached informal consensus. The 40 or so things that people said yes to are settled. Here is a consolidated set of documents to take all those things we've said yes to as a community in isolation, put them all together, and how do they look? And of course, when you put them all together, you find a few things where there were a few places where we'd agreed to two opposite things, we're not realizing we had quite done that, or, oh, if we're doing this, we don't need to do that anymore. There weren't many, but there were a few. Gave the community a couple of weeks to notice those kinds of things. And then the last step was, after that settled down, let's take the final agreed on draft that people have said, yes, this reflects the conversations over the last month or two, and publish it up in a place where everyone can find it. So now, as of 2 nights ago, you can go to OpenSocial.org, and here is the 0.8 spec that the community converged on, and I'm just highlighting RESTful APIs as one of the big pieces that's brand new in 0.8. So that's the process. If people have questions about it later, be happy to take those. The important takeaway from the process is that's how we're going to do 0.9, unless as part of the process someone suggests something better. But it worked pretty well. That's the default for how 0.9 will work. So if any of you all are interested as you get involved and you have things you'd like to improve or enhance, please find the mailing list and jump in. All right. That was process. What about output? What is 0.8? What are the things in 0.8? Overall comment that I want to make about compatibility, we worked pretty hard as a group in doing this, and some of the comments and discussions were, how can we add this enhancement, add this capability, clean up that inconsistency without causing pain to existing apps, to existing developers? So how can we be as backwards compatible as possible? So first point is, every OpenSocial app says at the top, require feature equals OpenSocial-0.7 right now. Most containers are going to keep those working unchanged for a while. That's not a requirement, but we expect that just the market forces of apps are going to cause that to happen. So you don't have to think about 0.8 until you're ready to. Second is most of the changes in 0.8 are backwards compatible. So if you take a 0.7 app and just say require feature equals OpenSocial 0.8 instead of 0.7, it will mostly work. There are a few places, and they're called out in some of the doc, where there are small changes you have to make, but nothing hard as far as we can tell. All the places where we saw that there was where we saw a need for any change at all, it didn't feel at all onerous. Getting into the substance, 3 big areas. And I'm going to bring John up in a minute to talk to you about these. First area we're going to talk about are the enhancements to the JavaScript and XML definitions of OpenSocial. John will walk us through those. Second, we're going to talk about the RESTful APIs. John Panzer is going to talk about those. And then finally, something that is not part of 0.8, but is on roughly the same timeline, templating language for OpenSocial. And Evan's going to come up and talk about those. On the JavaScript and XML, yeah, come on up, John. On the JavaScript and XML, I'm not going to talk to the bullets. John's going to do that in a minute. But I wanted to just highlight what's the gestalt of these changes. The gestalt is a lot of cleanup, a lot of places where people pointed out rough edges in 0.7, a lot of convenience things where it's like, hey, this worked, but you could make it a lot easier for me and save me typing the same code over and over again if you did this. And a few places where people who are deploying live things found mostly performance-driven. Wow, there's a real opportunity here to make something better if we just enhance the spec to allow a standard cross-container optimization. So those are the big categories of work. With that, John, all yours.
All right, thanks, David. So 0.8 bore quite a bit of fruit, and I'm going to just go over a number of the changes that have been made over and above 0.7 that were made very much at a high level and very briefly because I only have a limited amount of time. I strongly suggest that you go to the source of truth. There's the resources placed in the resources section of this presentation at the end if you're interested in finding out all the details and more. So I'll start with gadget. I've sort of organized this in three different buckets. The gadgets XML, which is essentially the declarative markup that represents an OpenSocial application, the gadgets JavaScript APIs, and the OpenSocial JavaScript APIs. I'll start with the gadgets XML. First of all, you're now able to inline message bundles. Message bundles are the localization tool for OpenSocial apps. They essentially allow you to specify key value pairs for a given language or potentially country pair. And now, rather than hosting them externally in an XML file, you can inline the contents right into the gadgets XML for your application. It's optional. The old syntax still works, but it is something that many people will find a little bit simpler to use. We have preloading functionality now. This is an important performance optimization that allows the server that's rendering gadgets to preload data from some other server straight into the gadget while rendering, so that it's available to the gadget without doing an asynchronous XHR call upon gadget load. This is something that notably improves perceived performance in particular because the gadget has data that's useful for rendering or for interaction immediately upon it's being rendered. OAuth functionality. You're able to specify multiple OAuth services or one OAuth service in the gadget spec and interact with the data that is keyed upon authentication in some particular way. We hope that this is going to enable a brand new class of applications that are built on OpenSocial and gadgets overall that allow interaction with data that is endemic to a particular person rather than general purpose. And OAuth is the specification that we've chosen to standardize on for that. Link tags. There are a number of different link tags with arbitrary rel values. A couple of them have been specified that allow better structured access to help, support information, as well as lifecycle events that containers might support. For instance, when a gadget is installed or uninstalled or perhaps modified in some way, a callback will be made to the link specified here by the gadget developer so that the gadget developer has more insight into the way that their applications are being used, how many people are using them, and how many people have chosen not to use them as a function of time, perhaps as a function of code changes that they have made. Message substitution is now supported in all user-facing fields. Again, I've talked about message bundles a little bit earlier. This is essentially just a common sense change that allows you to localize anything that the user could possibly see, including, author was already in there, screenshots, display name in user pref, and other sorts of values. You can now, OpenSocial app developers can now specify preferred size on a per view basis. This is another perceptual improvement which helps containers size your application to roughly the size that you would anticipate it to be, or precisely the size that you anticipate it to appropriately be upon being rendered, so that upon loading it doesn't have to pop into place as it might have previously. So that covers gadgets XML changes. Now I'm going to move on to the gadgets.star namespace JavaScript APIs, which are the core of the gadgets platform, on top of which everything in OpenSocial, or not everything in OpenSocial, but the OpenSocial apps built in gadget XML is built. We've added a refresh interval to the proxy, to the get proxy URL call. This gives a directive, which is a hint. It's not required, but it gives a directive to the proxy server that is hosted by a given gadget rendering service, indicating how often to refresh the data that is actually being proxied. Gadgets.util.sanitize HTML is a common sense function that allows you to pass in an arbitrary text string, and it sanitizes it in such a way that it's safe for inlining into a given page. This will hopefully be a method that's used by quite a few people to improve overall security, avoid XSS, avoid phishing sorts of attacks and others. Request Navigate to now accepts an optional owner ID. This allows you to request navigating to a particular view of your app, potentially on another owner's page, as opposed to the default, which is backward compatible behavior, which is the current owner's page. A brand new pub/sub communication mechanism, atop which we're hoping that a number of new classes of gadgets will be built. Get rid of that. This is the pub/sub semantics are essentially what you would expect. You publish on certain subjects, you subscribe to certain subjects, and you can unsubscribe from them as well. And this allows gadgets to speak with other gadgets in a container facilitated way. We don't have a whole lot of structure on what the subjects are right now, and this is the sort of thing that I hope to evolve in future iterations of the gadgets and OpenSocial specs overall. We've standardized on view type values on the 4 view types that in practice we found to be most widely used across all OpenSocial containers: Canvas, Home, Preview, and Profile. The standardization will simply just help OpenSocial app developers specify a limited set of views and know exactly how they're going to be used by social networks that support OpenSocial. We've updated a number of things in make requests. It doesn't really beget a great slide in terms of code, but we've deprecated the authenticated authorization type in favor of OAuth because we're standardizing on OAuth for authenticated data retrieval. And a number of signed request parameters have been standardized and clarified, and I suggest that you read the sort of source of truth documentation if you're interested in the details there. So lastly, I'll move on to the OpenSocial JavaScript APIs. We've added just a number of new bits of data and better structured data about people. Has app indicates whether or not the person who's represented by the person object has your app installed already on the page. We've added a network presence field, which indicates the status relative to the social network of the person that you've retrieved, indicating such things as whether they're online, whether they're away and busy, and so on. And we've better structured the looking for parameter to include activity partners, dating friends, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a corollary improved ability to request people when retrieving them from OpenSocial servers. In particular, you can retrieve top friends. You can retrieve people who are friends with other people by user ID. You can retrieve people in a group by group ID. And we also support querying friends of friends or friends of friends of friends using a combination of user ID of the source person as well as network distance. Friends of friends, you get the idea. There are a number of persistence data enhancements to the app data APIs. All data is now treated as JSON, which facilitates better storage and retrieval and intelligent escaping for security purposes of complex data, as well as simple data stored as a derivative case. An escape type parameter has been applied to the get field and new fetch person app data APIs, which allows developers to specify how data stored therein should be escaped again to help codify best practices in OpenSocial app development. And we've also added a new API, new remove person app data request, to give people more control over their data, to allow people to delete app data that they've created before in certain ways. And with that, I will move on to Mr. John Panzer, who will be speaking about the RESTful APIs.
Thanks, John. So as John Panzer comes up, just framing what are the RESTful APIs, why do they exist? This was something that when we with the first few partners introduced OpenSocial back in November, we expected that we were going to launch OpenSocial with JavaScript APIs and RESTful APIs on day one. It turned out that people said there's an awful lot we can do with just the JavaScript APIs, so we pushed that out and said let's take a little more time on the RESTful ones. But as soon as that was out, that was like probably the single loudest, I'd say that was the single loudest common theme, is yeah, nice. I like the JavaScript stuff, but I also want to be able to take advantage of my server. I also want to be able to interact with social networks with OpenSocial capabilities from a mobile device, from a server, from other places than just JavaScript in the app. You'll see as John goes through it that the RESTful APIs are meant to be a complete complement to the JavaScript APIs. You could build interesting apps with nothing but the JavaScript APIs. You could build interesting apps with nothing but the RESTful APIs. And then, of course, if you use them together, you have a lot more flexibility. So let John tell us about it.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to give a pretty high-level overview of what the RESTful APIs are. David gave a great motivation for why we want them, so I'll jump right in. It gives us the ability to move into new environments, so not only JavaScript, but also environments that we don't even know about yet. And it gives us the ability to let me back up. What is the RESTful API? What it actually is a protocol that is platform, language, and social network independent. So it's agnostic as to all those things, which means that you can build all kinds of things on top of it. That means that it has to be able to operate in many environments. So it gives you a bunch of capabilities. I'm going to go over a few of the top ones. It lets you, given that you know which social network you want to talk to, it provides a standard way for you to discover what capabilities that social network provides. Not all social networks provide every optional capability. And also discover how to talk to that social network, since not all social networks have exactly the same set of URLs. So this looks a little complicated. We're using XRDS Simple as our discovery mechanism, which actually is also the discovery mechanism used by OpenID and potentially a generic one used by OAuth as well. So we're trying to standardize on one spec. There's a lot of code here, but basically you look for a key, and it says, I want to find out about people, and then you find the value, which is a simple HTTP endpoint or URL that you can then do additional things on, such as get, post, delete, etc. In this case, I'm looking for people information associated with a particular person. I have their user ID, and I can substitute that into this URL. So this is actually a URL template. So then how do you actually allow somebody to access their social network data? You need authentication and authorization. We're standardized, as we said before, on OAuth, top to bottom. This is another use of OAuth, where people who are providing this information also provide a OAuth endpoint so that people can, in a couple of different ways, provide permission and authentication if necessary to let services or third parties, not necessarily JavaScript gadgets, but any type of service, do things on their behalf. Access their data. Read-only is the most simple example. They can also let them modify the data. You can give access to an application to let it post new things to your activity stream, for example. That's not standardized by the protocol, but the OAuth allows you to specify all that and encode it. What kind of data can you access? It's the same data you can access through JavaScript. So that means that people, activities, groups, and the app data as well. And it also lets you access the data in multiple formats. So we've standardized on JSON as a very simple, lightweight, and easy to parse format. However, we've also have a lot of data which is very amenable and fits well into the feed data model. So we're using Atom XML with some extensions. And any client can request either format. So whichever format is best for a given client is the one that the containers will provide. So just as an example, the JSON format should look hopefully pretty familiar. There's IDs, there's data. This is the same data that you see in the JavaScript API, but it's a wire protocol format. So the wire protocol is actually standardized, and you can write code that will parse and generate this in any language. And we're going to show a demo of that a bit later on. The Atom flavor is exactly the same, a little bit more verbose, but also a little bit more extensible and a little bit more standardized. So you could plug this into something like Yahoo Pipes, and it will process it. And there's a bunch of other things which the RESTful API provides. standard way to do to access messaging capability that may be built into the OpenSocial container. It's optional. If the container wants to allow people to message their friends, it can allow that. If not, it can not allow it, or it can put restrictions on it. We provide ways to do concurrency so that you don't clobber each other's changes. If there are multiple users accessing the same data, we want to be able to do that. And we provide efficient ways to batch requests so that you can send multiple requests over a single HTTP round-trip response. As an example, just this week, on the High Five sandbox, there's a live example of this with dummy data, but real code, using our Shindig Social Data API, which implements the RESTful API. And if you do this command, or an equivalent command, or stick this URL in your browser, you will see data that starts like this. It will give a bunch of friends for user 1000, who is a fake user, and the @friends means hand me all of the friends of that user. Right now, there's no authentication. It simply hands it to you and trusts you. Obviously, later on, there will be real authentication. And with that, I am going to ask Dan Bentley to come up and give another example of the OpenSocial RESTful API in the wild, and this time with a real UI and a real running demo. Thanks.
Great. Hi. So what you see right now is Vorby. It was one of the launch AppSpot apps. It's really cool. It was written by Brian Peterson, a Googler who was very kind to let us use it and play around. So we have this app, and it's a nice app. It does some cool stuff. It shows you some quotes up there. All the quotes up there are good. They're all good quotes, but they're not really funny quotes. And if you ever get to know me, you'll know that I'm funny. And I have funny friends. But this app isn't taking advantage of it so far. So we decided to modify it so that it could. So if I go and I log in, then as soon as the server gets back to me, I'll be able to see not just the top quotes overall, but the top quotes as they're rated by my friends. Now, this is a Python application that's running on App Engine. It doesn't have to be on App Engine, but it's a pretty easy way to deploy apps. And what it's doing is taking the ratings from my 12 friends who are also using Vorby and changing the scoring function. So you can see here, these are all comedic quotes, which is good because I'm funny, and I like funny. This is not using any JavaScript. Instead, it's talking to a running Shindig server, and I can go here and I can load this URL, and it's actually going to spit out the JSON right here that's my friend graph. Then using an open-sourced library that we're still working on and polishing, we can take that data and use it in Vorby. So we now have a full stack that's open source that we can iterate with. The application, the client libraries, and Shindig itself all running. And we think that this is a pretty cool way forward to use the RESTful APIs to take an app that's already cool and by making it social, make it cooler. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. So as Evan's coming up, I'm just going to add one last thought on the RESTful APIs, and then segue to the right window. Segue to no, not that one. Maybe that one. And then we'll segue to templating language. So around the RESTful APIs, what you just saw, that's the first time I've seen that demo run, by the way, so I'm really excited to see that. Dan's been putting that together. What you just saw was an example of, as Dan said, using the RESTful APIs in a way that completely ignores the 0.7 JavaScript and all the JavaScript capabilities that OpenSocial provides. That's great, right? That means that as a container that has social information and wants to provide access to app builders who build on that application, there's now a way for anyone who wants to, in a standard way, to build an application that runs on their server and does whatever it wants with the information, conforming with the policies of the container, of course, to get at information about users, about their who they know, who they are, what they do, all of that, and include that in an app. That's terrific. The other thing that the RESTful APIs allow is the hybrid model, where if you are building a JavaScript application, and the advantage of that, of course, is that you're actually getting real estate inside the container. If you want your app to run in High5 or run in Orkut, because that's where your users are, you want to be running in there for many reasons, independent of programming model. But it lets you build an application that runs in the social network and talks to your server, and your server can do some background work, can pull some information from the social network server, can do some of the heavy lifting ahead of time or overnight, or distribute the load, whatever makes sense for your mix of programming expertise in your house and performance trade-offs at runtime. It lets you use whatever combination of, I don't have a server at all, and I want to do this all client-side in JavaScript, or I want to do it entirely on the server, or hybrid. So, I think that we're going to see some pretty exciting combo apps come together as people start deciding how to balance between those two. That's the real power of the RESTful APIs. Continuing on the theme of programming model, but segueing to a completely different piece. First, I'm going to repeat the timing label around this. Everything you've heard so far is part of the 0.8 spec. It is published as a final spec on OpenSocial.org, and as you heard from some of the comments, it is well on the way to being fully implemented in the Shindig reference implementation, which therefore means that many containers have gotten a jump on what would it take to implement 0.8. That's everything you've heard so far is in that state. What you're about to hear now is on a similar time frame, but a little bit behind, meaning we did not want to hold 0.8 for this, but we wanted to get it out as quickly as possible. Evan will talk to you about it. The templating language and tags is again addressing, hey, I have more than one way I want to build apps. I would like to do this. I would also like to be able to use much more of a markup language style of building apps. I would like to be able to build an application where I don't write anything that feels like code to me. I do something that feels like HTML, and I stick in some substitution variables saying, put the person's name here, or put their picture here, things like that. And I want to do that in a way that lets me do this sort of declarative, marked up HTML version of what I want my application to display, and then let the container take care of the rest, and let the container take care of making it look right and feel right and everything else for the container. That was the goal of the templating language. As with the RESTful, it's meant to interoperate. You can mix and match however you want between coding in the JavaScript 0.7 style, coding in the RESTful new in 0.8 style, and coding in a markup language style that you're about to hear about. Last comment, and then I actually will let Evan talk. There's an and in that bullet, templating language and tags. It's a technical point, but an important one. The design that the community is starting to reach consensus on is a layered design, where Evan will show you some examples, but there are two layers he's going to be showing you. He's going to be showing you the notion of a templating language, which allows app builders to include template language markup in their JavaScript, in their HTML, which is marked as, hey, this is a template, and here's how I can expect it to be processed and converted into renderable HTML. And that's a general purpose language that lets you do whatever you want, including defining tags that do whatever you want. So it's just a nice programming model. In addition, building on that, there will be a standard set of tags that are the ones that the spec will say, to be an OpenSocial compliant container, here are the 5 or 10 or 20 tags that you're expected to support that allow exactly that very simple model I said before of sticking a tag saying person's picture goes here. Those are intentionally layered. You'll see Evan's going to talk mostly about the templating language, a little bit about the tags, but just keep in mind those layers both for understanding and for questions later. So, Evan?
Great. Thanks, David. Let's get the show of hands again of how many people built OpenSocial applications. And of you, how many found it easy to write the HTML out using the JavaScript? I believe I see no hands up.
There was one.
Oh, there was one over there. I love JavaScript, and I like programming in JavaScript. It's not easy to create HTML. One of the big benefits of OpenSocial is the fact that you actually don't need to have your own server. You can take an HTML file, you can put it into the gadget XML, so you take raw HTML, and lo and behold, you have an OpenSocial application. One of the downsides of this is that JavaScript is a programming language of choice in that model. And there are no good established mechanisms for creating your HTML using JavaScript. So OpenSocial Templates is going to bridge that gap by making it easy to build your OpenSocial apps using templates that are embedded in the HTML documents. So I wanted to walk briefly through the goals here. The first one is obvious, that we want it to be easy to develop with. You can define templates by just copying and pasting HTML and making minor modifications. Clearly, if you have to learn more complex languages or use a different programming style, it's harder to do. You want to be able to take something that is actually working HTML, copy and paste into a template, make one small change to show the currently logged in user's name, for example, and actually have a working template. The second thing we want to have is for it to be secure. One of the challenges in JavaScript is that it encourages having XSS holes. Almost everyone I know who uses inner HTML to create JavaScript apps has created an XSS hole or two in their lifetime. So one of the big benefits is that this will be secure unless developers explicitly work around the XSS protections. We also think templates will help us be faster. This won't be a benefit right out of the gate because it'll take a little while to get the server-side optimizations working. But with templating, you can actually pre-process on the server and say, hey, instead of sending down one request with the JavaScript from your own app servers, one request with the people data, one with the application data. And although we can batch those, still another, even with batch, it's another HTTP request in the browser. Another with the base page, wait for all the other HTTP requests to load, so if your images load, et cetera, and then draw your gadget. You can actually just draw a lot of the gadget on the server. And something obvious, we want this to be OpenSocial style. It has to work in JavaScript. There's no option for it not to. So although we will support server-side optimizations, the starting point is that you'll be able to use a JavaScript library and use that to process OpenSocial templates. So script source equals OpenSocialTemplates.js, which will turn into require feature equals OpenSocial templates, and that will allow you to use the templating language in your gadgets. And the last one is also probably seems obvious, but it bears mentioning. We want to be able to build your entire application. And there are a number of things that actually makes it slightly more complex, but it's very much worth it. So specifically, we need to be able to bind to both data returned from the OpenSocial APIs, but also if the developer has their own custom data that they create on the client or get from their own servers, we need to be able to bind to that data and show elements on the page conditionally based on that or repeated elements based on that. And of course, we do need conditional repeated elements. There are some very simple versions of templating that don't have flow control constructs, but part of what we're proposing here has flow control built in. One thing I want to note is that this is at the proposal stage. As David outlined at the start, we have a consensus-based process for defining the specification. No one owns it. So right now we're at the stage where there's a proposal out to the mailing list. We're actively discussing it. And we hope to resolve all the details shortly, so that I think around next week's time frame, we're going to have a consensus and actually get it enshrined into law. So in the interest of time, I don't really have, if you're really curious about OpenSocial templates, definitely go to the Spec site. I'm going to give a quick tour and two easy examples here. This first example is for using templates and expressions. So if you look at that top script block where it has viewer.name in bold, you'll notice it's not script type equals text JavaScript. It actually says script type equals text OS template. We use the script tag to embed templates into your HTML page, so you don't have to create a separate document, although we will support that. That makes it easy when you're going along in programming and you're writing HTML to, at some point in the middle of the HTML document, break out into a template where you embed, for example, the currently logged in viewer's name. For people who are curious, the reason we chose a script tag is because we need the contents inside the script tag to not be processed by the HTML page. So we couldn't just take that same syntax when we start having OpenSocial tags with OS : in them and have it fit naturally in the HTML page. The HTML, depending on the browser, it'll have different behavior. So also you'll notice in there the expression viewer.name. That's an expression for embedding references to data in your OpenSocial template. In that case, you'll see below the other part in bold, we actually passed in the viewer's name. This could be from an OpenSocial call, but as I mentioned before, you can just take a JSON object that you create on the fly in the client or is returned from your own app server and embed that and send that along to the template processing system. So the flow is you make the calls to OpenSocial APIs to get people data, app data, and activities. You take any local data you have on the client, and you pass it into the template processing engine. At that point, all of the elements with script type equals text OS template will be processed inline on the page. So here's the more detailed text on this. Actually, I think the example is easier to illustrate what we're trying to do with it. The only interesting thing on this page, so expressions are a form $expression. The actual expression language is JSP expression language, which is a fairly well-defined language they use in JSP to write expressions. It has some nice features that it's escaped inside of XML tags, so you can use, or has variants inside of XML tags, so you can use LT instead of less than sign. But it's mostly just viewer.name, so variables that can be referenced, as well as simple operators like plus, minus, equals, greater than, less than. We showed an example. I'll go back actually to show it. But you can literally pass in just a piece of JSON. So if you have an array of GIFs that you want to have available for the app to show in a drop-down menu, just pass them in as an array of strings, and that can be referenced in the templating language. Then I'm also going to show OpenSocial tags and flow control. So you notice in this example the bold part where it says OS:show person. That's an example of an OpenSocial tag. And as David mentioned, we're actually not going to get in great detail on the specific OpenSocial tags because we think that will grow over time, and it's less important to be specific about what the tags are and more important to get a strong base to build on. So that's an example of a tag where you might show a person and you pass in the person based on some environment variable. And that would show in a container-defined style what the person looks like. So it might show a picture of the person. It might allow you to mouse over the person and see a hover card with more information about them. It probably will link to their profile URL. All that for free instead of writing your own JavaScript to figure out whether they have a profile URL and add it to the anchor tag. There are two other interesting parts of this example. One is the repeat statement. So you'll see it says repeat equals top.viewerFriends. So that's actually repeating over all of the viewer friends that are passed in. And that can be both data from the OpenSocial APIs, as mentioned before, or it can be data that you just pass in as JSON. And that repeats the tag multiple times. So obviously, for this example here, you'd see for each of your friends, it would show the person unless it's the owner of the page. And actually, that last part, unless it's the owner of the page, is the if attribute on the OpenSocial show person tag. You can also display elements conditionally. If you don't want them to show up on the page, you put an if tag on it and put the expression inside that says whether that element will show up. So again, this is the text description of what you just saw on the previous slide. It's pretty redundant with what I've already talked about. Two key points just to take away with. One is that OpenSocial is just one of many tag libraries. First of all, as a gadget developer, if you have repeated patterns you want to capture in templates, you can create your own templates to build a template library. Also, containers can provide their own. So Google might have a YouTube player template, which allows you to play YouTube videos. In addition, we anticipate there'll be library developers who create great libraries of OpenSocial template tags. And the other thing is we actually, the last point in the slide, we'll actually have if and repeat elements as well. We found that people were pretty split. Some people really like the attribute notation where you put the if attribute on the element, and other people thought that was confusing for people used to existing templating languages. So the last few slides are just a quick makeover showing what code looks like before and after using OpenSocial templates. Here's an example of code that shows a number of people in a list and shows each of them in a list of in a drop-down menu. So this is before, this is after. And actually, this was taken from the gift sample app, which is on the OpenSocial, the Orchid OpenSocial site. We have a demo app, and there's a step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1 is Hello World. Step 3 is a not too complex application. Doesn't really do that much. It lets you give a gift to your friend. Here's roughly the code for that application before. And then afterwards, it's a fairly nice block of simple HTML. So that's a quick summary of OpenSocial templates. What next? If you're interested in finding out more or getting involved in the process, please go to the Spec group. The proposal has been posted, and we'd love to hear feedback from any and all of you. We expect to get to consensus on the design next week. Obviously, it's community-driven, so We could find that there are people with strong opinions who haven't expressed them yet, but at this point it looks like we're headed towards consensus very shortly. And I think that's it. So at this point, we get the other presenters up on stage for Q&A.
So thanks, Evan. So we're happy to take questions on any or all of the topics. If there was something specific you heard that you'd like to drill down on, you've got the experts here. Or if there's something that we didn't cover, either about process or what's coming, and you're doing the right thing, please do come up to one of the 2 microphones for the folks listening by video afterwards. And go right ahead.
The OS template reminds me back in 1997 when Netscape used the CSS scripting. Remember that? Where you could embed JavaScript in the CSS values. I'm just curious, why do you use the script tag for that instead of just put it in the content element?
Sure. Yeah, so the question is, why do we use a script tag inside of there? The quick answer is because some browsers don't like it if you put OpenSocial tags outside of a script tag. There are actually a few HTML tags we could have used, but the one thing we couldn't do is easily just put it in line the page. We would have liked to. We agree that would have been cleaner, but it just wasn't possible technically with all the browsers out there.
Since you use your parser to parse the gadget XML.
So what happens in the
Client side and server side.
What's that?
Just client side and server side.
Oh, yes.
Because it's not an obvious
that's
point.
being processed on the server side, right?
Right. So if it's processed on the server side, it's easy. One of the core goals is that you can actually process it on the client side using JavaScript. And by the time you get access to it on the client side, the browsers have already had a chance to manipulate the data and put it into a DOM. And so you can actually confuse the browser if you have these random tags sitting out there in the HTML DOM. You actually need to enclose them in something the browser knows not to interpret in order for it to work.
Or maybe a specific tag that the browser will ignore anyway. It just that I don't like the idea of putting HTML contents inside the script tag.
Yeah, there are a couple other tags that are options. I think it's worth check on the discussion list. It was mentioned as an issue, but no one has brought it up seriously because it seemed like there were 3 options and none of them were seemed particularly better than the other. But it's definitely worthwhile discussion to have.
Because I'm looking forward to teaching this. I may have a problem
getting
definitely students to understand this.
Yeah. Thank you.
You talked a little about the templating engines. Let's say if I have a web app, I want to use the template, then do I need to run a container, the OpenSocial container on the platform, or I can call, whatever I'm calling OpenSocial container, they also have a rendering engine.
I have trouble understanding.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I caught that. Are you asking if you have to
run the OpenSocial container and to use the template and then?
Oh, sure. No, one of the core design goals is to make it work with just JavaScript. So you should be able to use the OpenSocial template library and a JavaScript include and run the templating language. We expect that containers will, if you're actually running inside a container, that you won't have the flexibility to change what some of those core tags will work like. But you should be able to run it in a standalone fashion as well.
I see. So if I have in mind,
I'm sorry, just
go
one
ahead.
thought and then continue. But some of the benefits that of the goals that Evan alluded to at the beginning will only bear full fruit when there are server-side processing happening. But it was a strong goal to say this should not be gated on any particular server doing anything to help. It should work with no server assist and get better with server assist.
Okay. So another thing about the tag is that we can create our custom tag then using tab. In that case, it's just going to tie into the OpenSocial container, right? But if you share across the other OpenSocial container, it's not going to work, right? If you have a custom tag on it.
So the custom tags that you use will actually be, if a container has custom tags, we would encourage them to put it in a custom tag library that everyone could use. We actually don't have a discovery mechanism to say if a tag is supported yet. That seems like a good thing to add. So you should be able to say if Goog YouTube player is supported, then use this tag. But also we anticipate they'll be put in libraries which can be published in a standalone fashion, so it's not out of the question that you could use. We don't want tags that only work on one container. That would be a bad outcome out of all this.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I think the RESTful APIs are very exciting. My one question, though, about them is what has been kind of the containers thinking around whether they're going to support that essentially through all of their available surfaces? I know, for example, classically, you only some containers only allow external iframes on the canvas page, so on the profile view, you're not going to be able to leverage RESTful APIs, and you're kind of stuck using the JavaScript APIs for maybe the profile view or home view. Do you know if that's changing at all in light of the fact that now there is a RESTful API, which would make it interesting to be able to render surfaces on the profile with other languages?
I can answer half of it. Someone may know what the containers are doing. I know that one of the strong motivations, one of the reasons we were getting hunger for the RESTful APIs was to allow solving exactly that problem by saying in places where latency is critical, like a profile page where there might be many applications, I would love to have a programming model that lets me do most of the work on my server and blast the answer down into the app. And in order to do that, I need to be able to do most of the work on my server, which means my server has to be able to have the conversation. And there's a pattern that we think is going to be very attractive to app developers where they do exactly that on their server, push the answer using the RESTful API into the app data store. And then on the client, they'll still have JavaScript, but all it will do is pull the inner HTML out of the app data store and display it, where that actual content was generated and pushed asynchronously from the server. So that's not, that is one particular pattern, but being able to use that type of optimization was one of the things that was completely blocked by having a server-side API. Does anyone have more updates on?
So that touches on one of the points with the RESTful API is it allows you to have a different programming model, asynchronous push and also pull. So you can pull down data either event-driven or periodically and synchronize with a data store or cache, depending on what policies are allowed, of the data on your server and mix and match and index it however you need in order to achieve. You may need to do data mining, for example, which you really need a large amount of data for. And so that allows a whole class of new applications that aren't possible if you can only get data in small pieces. In terms of the iframe question, since you can do your own website and you can use the RESTful APIs to talk to the data that you need, you can certainly do it inside of an iframe. And it's essentially down to the containers implementing the RESTful APIs and the policies around what kind of data they allow you to use. It doesn't dictate policy. The RESTful API provides a common protocol to let clients and servers talk, and an easy way for you to check to see what they actually support, and then it's up to the containers to say what policies and what data they will allow.
It helps the containers also to be able to offload some of the processing to the right place and have faster behavior. So, yeah.
Well, so one more thing to add to that is that the containers and actually the app developers have asked so much for RESTful APIs that I think having it implemented in Shindig as well as a thing that is looked to as a standard will help encourage the containers to support it in lots of different ways.
All right. Hi, I actually have a couple of questions. First is, are there any plans to change the development model? Like currently I have to put my code on a publicly accessible URL, go to the sandbox and then probably test it. Are there any plans to strip out probably some of the containers so that I can run it locally and do my development a lot faster?
We're having trouble with acoustics here. Let me make sure I heard your question properly.
Sure.
I think what you were asking is about the code deployment model for applications, where once you build your app, the app.xml, you have to put it on a publicly available server and then tell the container about it. Was that the question?
Even during development, I'll have to test it in the sandbox. I can't test it locally. So, and usually like Orchid Sandbox caches all the XML. If I change my gadgets XML, I'll have to like wait for probably a day to that caching get refreshed and stuff like that. So are there any plans to strip out probably a container that I can bring out locally and do my development?
Okay, so the question is if I wanted, again, we're just making sure that we have a funny echo up here, just making sure we heard right. One of the challenges with the current application deployment model is when you're doing rapid iterations, you see a typo, fix a bug, you want to try it again, that depending on the deployment path, that might be cached and you might not see your updates. And and there's two possible answers to that. One is a container-specific answer of saying, hey, have a way to blow through the cache, to bypass or disable caching. And there is such a mechanism in ORCID. There's a way you can, in ORCID, as an app developer, say, don't cache my app because I'm in development mode. So that's part of the answer. The other request was, hey, what about if I wanted to have a local container? And I don't know the current state of it. The trouble with a local container is is what data does it pull from, right? It starts to be less useful, but there is a sample container that's somewhat useful for app development.
Yeah, Shindig itself does have a sample container out of the box, but as David mentioned, the data to it isn't very interesting. One thing that's going on as part of the RESTful API implementation is that to really test and stress the REST API implementation in Shindig, we need more data. And so we're looking at various ways to try and figure out how to get more data in there, which will actually help with this as well. That said, I think that definitely rapid iteration as you're building an app is very important. And I think that most of the sandboxes I'm aware of do allow some way of blowing away the cache. In ORCID, you add ampersand BBC equals 1. I actually think High5 sandbox doesn't give in cache at all, but I might be wrong on that. But I think it's, again, just we and you all working with various containers out there to say, hey, you need to support this functionality.
Thank you.
I actually have another question. You also mentioned gadgets-to-gadget communication in 0.8. What model will it follow? Will it follow the same desktop gadgets communication model, or how is that going to be?
So I think the question was about gadget-to-gadget communication, in particular the pub/sub, gadgets.pub/sub mechanism. And you were asking, is there anything in the spec to talk about communicating to desktop gadgets? And the answer is nothing that I'm aware of.
Yeah, there's nothing right now. The gadget-to-gadget communication pub/sub mechanism is essentially just the gadget. The implementation is really just the gadget communicating with a container, which in turn serves as a router of messages back to other gadgets. It's purely within the client, but future iterations of the spec, I hope and anticipate, will include extensions such as those that you're mentioning, as well as potentially real-time communication between gadgets in one person's browser and a gadget on another browser across the world, for instance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We are getting close on time. I think we'll have time for one more, but then people most people here can hang around a bit and we can take questions informally. But
I'm just wondering if you could give us a little guidance on roadmap and timeframes. There's a lot of different permutations in the spec now, and so given that each container can implement this or not that, and kind of just the status of things, if we're starting a new app now, can we start building to the REST APIs and sort of expect to have support from the major containers? What about the templating thing, the server-side templates versus client-side templates and all that? If you could give us a little guidance on that.
The only thing I think we'll be able, not as much as I'd like to be able to give you. I think what we can give you pretty strong guidance on, relatively, is when will the Shindig reference implementation have support for which pieces of 0.8, right? So I can't, but we can. And then some of the containers are being very aggressive about deploying Shindig from trunk. As you saw, High5 has RESTful APIs running, but that'll be a container by container. What I expect will happen is there'll be a wave of containers that wait until the Shindig thing feels essentially done, and then the goal is that anyone using that will be able to deploy it quickly. But what can we say about Shindig?
So, we've already seen High5 have their read-only mode of RESTful API implemented today. There's more work obviously needs to be done in Shindig and to really allow the RESTful to come in. But what I would actually say is if you're looking to launch an app today or tomorrow, you want to do 0.7 because that is live in lots of places. If you're looking to do an app that you really want to use RESTful, I think it's a fine time to start working on that, as Dan has shown with his demo. But the number of containers as they roll out will happen over the next some number of weeks, and then the early small number of months is the way I would look at it. And then in terms of templating, the template proposal is out there, probably likely to reach consensus soon. I think it will probably roll in to the 0.9 model, though no roadmaps have been proposed for that yet.
Have most of the major containers committed to doing the RESTful stuff, or because not everyone's using Shindig, right?
So correct. Not everyone's using Shindig. The major ones that I know of that aren't using Shindig have committed to the RESTful APIs. The ones using Shindig get it almost for free. The design is such that they don't have to do a lot of extra work. We are over time, so we're going to have to. Sorry, but we're happy to take your question, and anyone else is just off air. So thank you, everyone, for coming. If you could, please fill out your eval forms. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.